Yeah, so I'm Laura, as Rod said. I am a member of the church community here in Vineyard. And it is a real privilege to share my story with you guys this evening. So thank you for listening. My mother did warn me not to talk too much. And Adam has told me to keep an eye on the clock. I am actually going to be 40 in June. So if I was to go through 40 years of my life, we would be here for a long time this evening. But as I was thinking about what I wanted to share and about my story of being in a relationship with God, I guess for me it's like a theme came to mind. And sometimes in church we sing a song called The Goodness of God, and there's a lyric in it that says, "All my life you've been faithful, all my life you've been so good." And it reminds me of Psalm 23. And if you've been around church or even been to a funeral or a wedding, you may have heard it. It's "The Lord's my shepherd." But it goes on and it says that his goodness pursues you all the days of your life. And I guess, that is really my story that I'm going to share with you this evening, is one of a God that has loved me and pursued me with his loving goodness from I was a very small little girl. So in case the accent didn't give it away, I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland. Apologies if you do struggle with the twang. I believe there might be subtitles on YouTube after. And my family went to church, although my dad stopped going when I was about 11 and him and my mum split up. And if I'm honest, I didn't really have an interest in God or church. And I remember as a teenager, mum trying to talk to me about it, and honestly, I couldn't have been less interested. And yet when I was about 15, I started to become friendly with one of the girls in my class in school. And her name was also Laura. And I couldn't have explained what it was, but there was just something about Laura that was different, that made me really drawn to her. And she started to invite me to her house on Fridays after school, to have dinner with her and her family, to kind of just spend some time. And then she invited me to go to the youth event in her church on a Friday night. And it was in that place and at that event, as well as through knowing Laura and her family, that I first began to really understand a little bit about God and about Jesus, and think actually, what, I might be interested in this. And at the time I went to a Baptist church. It was a church full of beautiful, loving people. It wasn't super modern, and I'm a little bit quirky, if you know me. And so I decided at 15 years old that I would go to the church down the road. I don't think I told my mum the first morning I did it. In fact, I think what happened was that I went to Bible class in my Baptist church with my friends, and they started to walk back up to go to the main church service, and I thought, I'll just go this way down this road to this church here. But actually, my home church in Belfast, which is Christian Fellowship Church, is somewhere that, for me, I really had the freedom to be able to start to explore who God was. And it was in that place and through those people that I really began to learn and understand that God loves me, that Jesus died on the cross for me, that he had good plans for my life. It was in that place that I began to understand that God didn't just speak in the Bible, and he didn't just speak to people who were pastors, but he wanted to speak to me, and did speak to me. That, in fact, he loved me so much sometimes when people prayed for me, they were able to tell me things about me and what was going on so deep inside me that I couldn't even have expressed, but that God told them to speak into bits of my life that were broken, to encourage me to keep going with him. It was in that place that I learned that God still does miracles and heals people. And I know that some people, when they tell a story like I'm telling now, will say, there was this day and there was a time and there was a place and I gave my life to Jesus and I became a Christian. And my story's not like that. It was this gradual journey. And eventually I decided that I would be baptised. If you don't know what baptism is, it's basically something that we do as Christians that's in the Bible, where we, in front of friends and family, go down into water and come back up again. And that's this just outward symbol that we've started this new life with Jesus. And, for me that was a big moment of really making a public declaration of the journey I was already on. I was an intern in my church then, between leaving school and going to university. Gap years were a big thing then, so if I hadn't told you my age earlier, you might guess. And unfortunately, somewhere then, when I started to go to university, I kind of lost my way a bit, where when I first encountered Jesus, I understood that Jesus died for my sin, and all I had to do to be forgiven, and all I had to do to be in relationship with him was ask. And yet, that kind of got a bit twisted along the way for me, where I started to worry too much about what rules God wanted me to keep and how he wanted me to live. And God does call us to be holy, but he doesn't call us to go through a list of rules every day, all day, looking for what we're doing right and wrong. And he certainly doesn't get real mad at us when we can't keep all of them all the time, because he knows we're not perfect. That's why Jesus died. But for me, actually, that became a huge cause of anxiety in my life, to the point that I became mentally really unwell. Like anxiety that you couldn't stand in the shower in the mornings. I worried I wasn't good enough. And I don't know that it was God's solution or the perfect solution, but for me, eventually, after years of trying to hold on to the faith that I remembered from a teenager, where there was freedom and grace and love, I decided I wasn't going to do it anymore, that it became too painful. And so I started to work, and I got married to a guy called Dave, and after a few years I eventually had this really bizarre experience where one Easter I just felt really compelled to go to church. And I can be a bit impulsive, if I'm honest. It's getting better as I get older, but it was literally like, I've decided I'm going, I got in my car and off I went. And I went to my home church, and they had a guest speaker that evening, and if I'm honest, he preached a sermon that I'd heard him preach years ago. So sorry, Jeff Lucas, I've outed you online that you recycle your sermons, but I think most of us who do that sort of thing for a while do. And yet, there was just something that happened to me as I sat listening to him tell me about the good news of Jesus again that evening, where I broke down and I wept, and at the end I went and asked someone to pray with me. And I gave my life back to the Lord at that point. And, I started to kind of get really involved in church again. And one of the things I was really excited about was that the church I belonged to started a new church in a different bit of Belfast, and I went and helped set that up and got involved in kids' work and leading a Bible study group and all sorts of exciting things. And unfortunately, my marriage wasn't going well. I was in an abusive situation, and in a situation where things were really, really hard at home. And it was making me really quite unwell, if I'm honest. And yet, I know that the God that I worship is the God of miracles. And so, I prayed faithfully that something would change in that situation. And yet it didn't. And, we tried counselling as a couple, counselling individually. We separated, we got back together. And unfortunately, it just got to a place where it wasn't going to be healthy or good for me to be in that place. And that was a real time of brokenness for me, because, I got married believing it was forever, and that wasn't worked out. And I found myself at 32 and kind of, at this loss. And if I'm honest, I probably for the first while really lent into God in that. But then if I'm honest, I just got angry and disappointed, because I was really thinking, God, where were you in this? I have faithfully served you. I have prayed. I've turned up early to pray. I've begged of you to fix this. I've tried everything to fix this. And you didn't come through for me. Where were you? And so I walked away again. And yet my story is that the Lord pursued me with his love. Because when I walked away and got divorced, I met Tom, who I'm now married to, and moved over here. So in case you wondered why an Irish girl's in England, married to an English guy. And the first job I got when I moved here, very soon after I started, I was asked by a local schools group to come and visit the port where I worked, and if I would do a tour for some young people. And of course I said yes. I'd always done youth work. I loved young people. I actually knew of the organisation that they were involved with, which was 24/7 prayer. What I didn't know is they've been trying to get into that port and that workplace for years and no one would let them in. And actually, because I knew of 24/7 prayer, there was something that made me say yes. But I made friends with the girl that ran that charity called Cheryl. Her husband and her run the church in Stanford-le-Hope. And, soon turned out that the world's small and we each knew some of the same people through 24/7's prayer, through the church I grew up in. They were just really good at meeting Tom and I where we were at understanding that I'd been on this really hard journey and I was really hurt and really broken, and not pushing me, but equally just being Jesus to us, just really loving us. And as part of my involvement in that schools programme, I went to a graduation event that they run for their young people, and Christy's mum was there. She sat beside me, we had a great chat, and Cheryl must have phoned me, or we must have caught up soon after, and she said, "Oh, Christy's mum loved meeting you. We've been talking about how great it is that you've got involved with the work we're doing." And she just says, "I love Laura, she's the real thing." And it was one of those things, I just felt so guilty, because I thought, I'm not living a life that's anything like being a real thing or being a Christian. I can't have that label. And yet I now believe that she saw something in me of the identity God had given me, that she was able to call out, even though I wasn't living like that. At the same time, I started to work with a guy called Adrian, who's a worship leader in Vineyard, and started to give him a lift home. And, we just kind of became friends, we chatted. I always loved worship music, and so we kind of started to talk about some of what he was doing. And again, he just listened to me about where I was at. Another pivotal moment then for me was that Charlotte and Christy were having trouble having a baby. And at this stage I was on this journey where I was sneakily listening to worship music on the way to work, okay? Like, what a habit, sneakily listening to worship music. And I couldn't pray for myself then. I couldn't think about coming back to God even. I was just so hurt from what had happened with my marriage still. And yet, I desperately wanted my friends to have their dream of having a baby. I didn't know what to do, but I did know who to turn to, and that was Jesus. And so I couldn't pray for me, but I could pray for them. And one of the songs I sang and played on repeat as I prayed for them was Yes and Amen. And there's a line in it and it says, "And I will praise your name again." And somehow in the place where I was at, it's like the Holy Spirit shot a bolt into my insides, into my heart, into my soul, that I knew that would be my story. That I knew I would sing his praise again. And yet, I was not going to even try to make it happen for myself. I still couldn't think of praying or doing anything. And then sometime later, I started to sneakily listen to sermons on the way to work. And I was listening again to a talk from my home church, and R.T. Kendall had been to speak, and actually I'd been at that service previously, and it was just playing, as the next in the kind of loop of old recordings. And as I was listening to it, he kind of asked people to think about, like, how do you know where you're going when you die? What makes you think you're going to heaven? If you had to get a piece of paper out and write your answer down, what would you write? What would it be? And of course, people say, like, oh, well, I'm a good person and I'm kind and I try to help other people. But he laid it out really clearly that actually that has nothing to do with it. That the only way is through Jesus. And that the only way we can have a relationship with God is through Jesus. And it was in that car on the way to work, I said, okay, God, here you have me again. Here you have me. And since then I've been on this journey with the Lord of starting to come along to Vineyard, of starting to walk in relationship with him again, of learning what that looks like in my life, of dealing with some of the questions that led me to walk away in the first place around being disappointed. And actually, as I look back on my story and my journey with God and the way he put people and places in my life, no matter how far I tried to run from him, and as I examine some of those questions, I'm more and more convinced that what I said at the start is true. That he is a good God, even if stuff doesn't always go as we plan. That he is the God that pursues us with his goodness every single day of our lives. And all he wants is for us to be in relationship with him as his kids. And actually, you know what? Rules aren't part of it. He just wants us in relationship to let him fix the broken part of our lives that sometimes we in the church call sin. And so my story this evening, and I really hope you see Jesus in this, is that he is forever faithful, that he is forever strong, that he is forever with us, forever.
Welcome Awaken Revival TV family. Please hit the subscribe button, drop in the comments any Bible scriptures, anything you want to say to encourage someone else today. Thank you, we love you.